And finally, I'm getting to the subject of our show here. So Petrochemical America began in 1998, right around the time I was doing, simultaneously with the pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge from my front porch. And I received a commission from the High Museum in Atlanta to come to the South and create a project of my own invention. There was no strings attached. And so I wandered around the South and discovered basically the petrochemical corridor called Cancer Alley, which is about a 150-mile corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And it's the second largest industrial corridor of refineries in the United States, second only to Texas. And I did a series of photographs. This was just this is actually a grain industry, but it's part of this whole industrial corridor. It's all related and tied together. And this small home will come up later. Something I want to show you. This is above the town of Norco, and this cloud has been coined a Norco Cumulus cloud. Basically, this is a man-made cloud that is there all the time, and it's volatile hydrocarbons, and it's created by the refinery in this town of Norco. And this actually used to be Union Carbide, but it's been taken over by Dow Chemical since I photographed it in 1998. This is actually a beautiful stretch of river above Baton Rouge. It shows what the river kind of used to look like. This is more of the river that Mark Twain used to describe. This is a alligator bayou swamp that was contaminated by human waste from a prison next door. This is the man fishing. I photographed at night, and they do a lot of night discharges, which is the way they can get around a lot of the regulations. So, not as apparent. And Taft Cemetery. This used to be a town, but that was moved once the industry moved next door, and the cemetery is all that's left. Then what happened was I did a show, published some of this work in 1998, and then the High Museum came back to me in 2009, said, and as part of the commission, the High Museum got 10 large prints and approximately 40 of my 8x10 contacts that's part of the arrangement for the permanent collection. And they had showed the 10 large prints and a selection of the contacts back in probably 2000. In 2009, they came back to me and said, we really love that work, and particularly a lot of the 8x10s that I had photographed, the smaller prints, they felt like they were really strong, and they'd like to see them large and revisit that work and maybe do a new edit. So I said, sure, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to revisit the area and see if it's gotten better, gotten worse, or stayed the same. I thought it would be kind of weird to show the old work without sort of updating it. So this picture was made in 2010, and if you look up here, that's a helicopter returning. The BP oil spill had just happened. And this is one of the first helicopters coming back right as that was all happening. And this is the levee down near a town called Venice, which is sort of the very end of the peninsula there, where BP, the Gulf of Mexico, and all the refineries or the platforms are. And then one of the developments in 2010 is they had this new big box retail outlet development, which was all concrete and just built over this beautiful swampland in that area. And so the last picture in the book of mine is this shopping cart. And I ended up doing a collaboration with the landscape architect Kate Orff. I'll show a few examples of her work. But one of the things I haven't really shown before, and I thought you might enjoy, is when I was photographing in 1998, I was keeping a journal, and my fantasy at that point was to do a serious intervention, basically take that whole corridor, clean it up, replant the banks of the Mississippi there, kick the oil companies out of these buildings, these industrial buildings, and replace them. I'll show you. So these are different buildings that I actually were like buildings. The architecture of these industrial buildings was really quite interesting, and they had different shapes. There was one that was triangular like that, and I figured that would make a perfect Museum of Modern Art. And so I figured it would be the Mississippi River Museum of Modern Art, which would be Mr. MoMA. I thought that'd be kind of cool. And then this was the logo on the side would be the river, that's the river from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. And then one of the refineries could be turned into a Voodoo Museum. Another one could be the E equals MC squared Museum, which would be the energy in the Mississippi corridor, Mississippi Cultural Corridor. And there, it would be great to turn one of the buildings into, like our Exploratorium here, but an alternative energy museum that's just devoted to that. This was Echo Cinema. There was this funny little, another triangular building. Another building could be Cajun Cuisine or the Jazz Museum. They actually have something that's not unlike that already. So you get the idea. So I was playing with just all these ideas. I've never published these or anything. They were just for my own, edification, if you will. But I was then actually one of the refiners I photographed had these big cylindrical forms, and I thought those would be really interesting if they were just green and turned into biofuel, algae-covered biofuel, which is actually something they're starting to think about doing now, which is kind of cool. But that's what this was about. Then I had a solar bullet monorail idea, which would basically, especially after Katrina, the idea of having a monorail from New Orleans out of New Orleans was not a bad idea to go up the river, and it would connect all these different refineries that would be turned into different kinds of museums. Or, the culture in New Orleans is so powerful. The food and the music and the history there is so important. So anyway, these are all my little fantasies, and and this is, I started to explore. So like here, I had an illustrator illustrate one of my idea of the solar bullet, taking from my photographs and actually start to illustrate it, and then I created a caption, which basically said the solar bullet monorail from Baton Rouge to New Orleans is not only the fastest monorail in the world, but anyway, so on and so forth. It's kind of for the book idea, I was thinking that I would do something like that, but it never quite gelled quite right and felt a little too utopian. And I talked to an architect friend, and I felt like I should enlist some architect to work with me on this project. But I didn't want to just present the photographs. It was too depressing in and of itself. So let's see. Sorry, this is one last thing. So I had things like outdoor movie, turning the barges into outdoor movie theaters that would go up and down the river. Then I had this idea for a floating opera from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. I was going to ask John Adams, a local guy, to do an opera for that. It was based on John Barth's The Floating Opera. The idea that an opera could float downriver and people would stand on the banks and hear parts of it and then share with other people what they heard. And then that little house I showed you at the beginning, I thought that would be a perfect museum. Just keep that little house intact, because they'll never be able to resell that house. Nobody would want to buy that house. There's no resale value. So actually keep that house in its shape, painted yellow with flowers around it, and then do all these oral tapes that have been collected about what's been going on here that people have been collecting in the area, and so make it into a little museum. But when I make a long story short, I talked to architect friend, a writer, and she introduced me to a number of architects, and I interviewed them. I showed them my book dummy. I showed them these drawings that I just showed you, and I finally met Kate Orff, and she looked at them and she said, these drawings are very sophomoric. This is what I get from my freshman and sophomore students in class. It's just, it's kind of silly and too utopian. But what we can do here is, she started talking about looking at the photographs and unpacking all the latent information in the photographs. And as she did that, she had really interesting ideas. And so I immediately knew that she was the one I was looking for, and we started this collaboration. And for the next couple of years, we I sent her all my photographs. She started researching them, and she would look at the photographs, look at basically the history of the places of my photographs, project into the future what the place might look like, and then also look vertically at the social, political, environmental, health issues embedded in the photographs. And then, through research, would unpack them in these series of drawings and through lines. So these are a few samples. There's some outside, and the book is, half the book are my photographs and half are her through lines, which are just amazing. And so, so for example, in this one, which is the history of oil, oops, jumped. One of my photographs, which is a sunset by one of the campuses there, is actually sort of hidden back in there, sort of embedded behind there. She did another thing about the toxins that go into the body, and I do have a couple details. They're really quite beautiful, thoroughly researched. In this case, there's a photograph here of a Texaco station that had been shut down, and she used that as an opportunity to explore the history of all the different corporate evolution of all the industry, of the the monopolies, the breakup of the monopolies, where they are today. Then another one of my photographs she took, and then she showed just what all these different stacks are used for, in the refinery process. This takes two of the photographs, my fisherman here and that Norco cloud there, and does this whole thing about the cycle of pollutants, between animals and into the atmosphere, water, into human beings. And then at the very end, in the very back part of the book, is a glossary of terms and solutions for a post-petrochemical culture. And basically what Kate said is she was inspired by her experience as a Girl Scout. You get this, I guess, this Girl Scout handbook, how to fix things. So we call this the handbook, and it's a series of examples of models of alternative practices today. Sometimes they're small, but sometimes they're quite large, and something we're continuing to add to, and probably the future editions of the book will have an updated version. But it's sort of the book is and the show is really unpacks sort of the history of petrochemical, our addiction to petrochemicals and the problems there, and the book is the glossary at the end is just the beginning of maybe looking at alternatives.